Kylo Ren's adult life demonstrates a persistent pattern of internal conflict, reinforced by his environment, behavioral responses, and the structural dynamics of the First Order. His actions across the sequel trilogy indicate that his attempts to separate himself from earlier influences consistently created new dependencies. Each attempt to redefine identity produced additional instability. This pattern can be observed through his interactions with Han Solo, Supreme Leader Snoke, Rey, and the First Order leadership. The killing of Han Solo in The Force Awakens illustrates this dynamic. Kylo Ren's stated goal, expressed directly before the act, was to eliminate what he perceived as an internal source of weakness. However, the scene's aftermath contradicts this intention. His physical reactions and subsequent decline in combat performance demonstrate that the action did not resolve his conflict. Instead, it intensified cognitive dissonance. The film presents immediate evidence that the act destabilized him rather than clarifying his direction. His relationship with Snoke further solidifies this cycle. Snoke consistently framed Kylo Ren's power as insufficient and required continual proof of loyalty. This environment created a dependency loop in which Kylo attempted to gain approval from a figure who repeatedly denied it. Snoke dismissed his failures, questioned his commitment, and compared him unfavorably to Darth Vader. This dynamic formed a reinforcement structure in which Kylo Ren's self-worth relied on external validation that was intentionally withheld. After Snoke's death in The Last Jedi, Kylo Ren assumed leadership of the First Order, under conditions that magnified his existing insecurities. His behavior during military engagements, particularly his fixation on pursuing Luke Skywalker on Crate, indicates a shift from strategic thinking to impulsive decision-making, driven by unresolved identity issues. Scenes involving General Hux highlight administrative tension and a lack of unified command, which further eroded Kylo Ren's sense of authority. Kylo Ren's interactions with Rey function as an additional source of internal conflict. Their Force dyad allows each to perceive the other's thoughts and emotions, creating direct exposure to an alternate identity model. Rey persistently identifies the presence of Ben Solo within him, while Kylo Ren attempts to suppress that interpretation. Their dialogues in The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker demonstrate that he recognizes an alternative path, but lacks the psychological foundation to pursue it consistently. Rey's influence presents a conceptual challenge to Kylo Ren's constructed persona. She repeatedly labels him as conflicted, and he responds by intensifying behaviors aligned with the Kylo Ren identity. His proposal that Rey join him after Snoke's death illustrates this conflict. He rejects both the Jedi and Sith frameworks, yet offers no coherent alternative philosophy. This supports the interpretation that Kylo Ren did not possess a stable, ideological foundation, only a reactionary posture against prior expectations. The collapse of Starkiller Base, the failures on Crate, and the leadership challenges within the First Order demonstrate that Kylo Ren's pursuit of control did not result in competence. Instead, each setback exacerbated his instability. Rather than producing resilience, these failures reinforced his belief that external obstacles were responsible for his setbacks, preventing introspective resolution. This is consistent with characters who construct identities around negation rather than development. His fixation on legacy remains a central structural variable in his instability. Kylo Ren simultaneously rejected and emulated Darth Vader, creating an inconsistent psychological orientation. Scenes showing him repairing his mask in The Rise of Skywalker exemplify a return to a persona he previously dismantled. Such symbolic reversals indicate an absence of internal consolidation. He alternated between rejecting his past and reenacting it, resulting in cyclical instability. The Force dyad connection continues to reveal this instability. During their confrontations, Kylo Ren presents different goals depending on context: confrontation, recruitment, elimination, or dialogue. This inconsistency demonstrates a lack of strategic orientation. His decisions respond to immediate emotional pressure rather than long-term planning. Rey's presence acts as a constant reminder of alternate potential outcomes, creating further dissonance. Kylo Ren's role within the First Order further constrained his identity development. He inherited a military organization built on rigid hierarchy and instrumental obedience. His leadership style, documented through several scenes in The Last Jedi, replaced structure with personal volatility. Officers displayed visible unease in his presence, and his decisions lacked consistency or strategic discipline. This environment reduced his ability to stabilize identity because it rewarded intimidation rather than competence. Kylo Ren's attempt to sever emotional ties through violence did not produce independence. Instead, it intensified the unresolved components of his formative years. His confrontation with Leia's ship in The Last Jedi illustrates this pattern. He refrains from firing, indicating that core attachments remain intact despite his stated goals. This inability to reconcile stated objectives with behavioral outcomes reflects continuing internal fragmentation. His behavior after learning the truth of his lineage in The Rise of Skywalker further demonstrates identity instability. Discovering his origin as the grandson of Palpatine does not produce clarity, but instead reinforces the perception that his life has been defined by external forces. His dialogue indicates that he interprets this revelation as confirmation of determinism rather than an opportunity for agency. This contributes directly to his continued inability to establish identity autonomy. The turning point in his arc, the memory reconstruction scene with Han Solo, reveals the internal contradiction driving his behavior. He states that he knows what he must do, but lacks the resolve to act. This mirrors his earlier confession on Starkiller Base, showing that his core conflict remained unchanged across 3 films. The decision to throw away his weapon represents a symbolic rejection of the Kylo Ren persona, but occurs only after extended psychological collapse. Kylo Ren's transformation back into Ben Solo demonstrates that an alternate identity existed but was suppressed rather than eliminated. His subsequent actions in The Rise of Skywalker indicate confidence and clarity absent from earlier depictions. This shift suggests that identity stability had always been possible but inaccessible due to prior structural influences, environmental pressures, and unresolved developmental trauma. His final act, transferring life essence to save Rey, signifies a return to agency independent of external validation. It is the only moment in his arc not driven by legacy, pressure, or manipulation. However, it also reflects the limited time available for identity reconstruction. The evidence indicates that this clarity was achieved only at the moment of self-sacrifice, leaving no opportunity for sustained development. Taken collectively, the portrayal of Kylo Ren shows a figure whose life trajectory was shaped by conflicting expectations, inconsistent guidance, manipulative influences, and internal responses that amplified instability. His difficulties did not arise from inherent flaws, but from a developmental environment unable to provide coherence or support. His adult life reflects the cumulative impact of unresolved identity conflict, external pressure, and structural forces that prevented stable self-definition. Ben Solo's development is defined by conflicting environmental pressures, high parental visibility, early exposure to force sensitivity, and competing ideological expectations. His childhood placed him under structural conditions that limited autonomy and identity formation. As the offspring of Leia Organa and Han Solo, he inherited a socio-political legacy that positioned him as a figure of interest from birth. Canon material indicates that observers within both the New Republic and remnants of the Imperial network monitored him because of his heritage, creating an environment in which individuality was secondary to symbolism. His early force sensitivity functioned less as an advantage and more as a destabilizing factor. Leia describes sensing darkness within him before sending him to Luke, indicating that his abilities produced concern rather than encouragement. This concern shaped adult behavior toward him. Instead of receiving developmentally appropriate guidance, Ben encountered heightened scrutiny. Scenes from The Last Jedi and ancillary materials imply that his family members monitored his reactions, interpreting ordinary adolescent behavior as signs of potential danger. The presence of Darth Vader as his biological grandfather further altered how others perceived him. The revelation of Leia's lineage in the New Republic Senate produced political backlash. Although Ben was a child during this period, his environment became defined by distrust directed at his family. This historical context created a developmental framework in which he was associated with threat narratives rather than treated as an autonomous individual. Social expectations around legacy influenced how adults approached him and how he internalized their apprehension. Han Solo's inconsistent parental involvement constituted another structural variable. Han's discomfort with Force culture and his frequent absences limited his ability to provide stability. In The Force Awakens, Han states directly that he and Leia lost Ben when they sent him to Luke. Although the line is subjective, it reflects a pattern. Their solution to Ben's struggles was delegation rather than engagement. This decision removed Ben from his primary caregivers during a period when attachment stability is typically crucial for identity formation. Leia Organa's response to Ben's instability was shaped by political and institutional constraints. As a high-ranking figure in the New Republic, she faced demands that limited the time and emotional resources she could devote to addressing Ben's development. Furthermore, her reluctance to reveal the truth of his lineage, documented in the novels, created a structural barrier to open communication. Her fear of how he would react to learning about Darth Vader prevented early disclosure that might have reduced later identity conflict. Luke Skywalker's role as Ben's mentor added another layer of expectation. Luke approached Ben not only as a student, but as the potential rebuilder of the next Jedi generation. This framing positioned Ben within a predetermined future. Luke's belief that Ben might fulfill a prophetic function placed ideological pressure on an adolescent still attempting to understand his own capabilities. Canon scenes make clear that Luke expected discipline aligned with reconstructed Jedi doctrine, which conflicted with Ben's personal needs and developmental stage. Ben's sensitivity to the Force amplified environmental pressures. Unlike characters trained from infancy, such as prequel-era Jedi, Ben entered training with established emotional patterns. Luke observes his power as raw and unfocused, indicating that Ben's abilities lacked the structured grounding necessary for stability. Without total immersion in Jedi practice, Ben existed between conflicting systems: his parents' cultural background, Luke's emerging Jedi ideology, and the political expectations placed upon him due to family lineage. Snoke's early manipulation exploited these structural vulnerabilities. Visual and textual evidence confirms that Snoke contacted Ben long before the events of Luke's training camp. Snoke presented an interpretative framework that reframed Ben's internal conflict not as developmental struggle, but as evidence of suppressed potential. This provided Ben with the first consistent narrative explaining his feelings. Although inaccurate, Snoke's interpretation filled the explanatory vacuum created by inconsistent guidance from his family and the Jedi. The Jedi training incident illustrates the culmination of these pressures. Luke's momentary impulse to ignite his lightsaber over Ben was not an isolated event, but the manifestation of years of concern. From Ben's perspective, this acted as confirmation that the person meant to guide him viewed him primarily as a threat. The canonical flashback structure in The Last Jedi shows that although Luke regretted the moment immediately, Ben awakened to the sight of his mentor, prepared for violence. This event functioned as a catalyst, not because it created the conflict, but because it crystallized the structural distrust that had defined his life. Ben's decision to reject the Jedi identity was therefore grounded in accumulated evidence, rather than spontaneous rebellion. His subsequent destruction of the training temple aligned with the psychological need to dismantle the system he believed had predetermined his failure. This action reflects a consistent pattern. When faced with environments that defined him through expectation, Ben attempted to negate the source rather than negotiate with it. Following his departure, Ben adopted the Kylo Ren identity as a form of environmental escape. The mask, described in ancillary text, served not only as symbolism, but as a behavioral boundary separating him from earlier affiliations. By adopting a rigid persona, he could reject both his family legacy and the pressures associated with Jedi training. The mask's design, reminiscent of Vader, provided an external narrative that overshadowed the internal instability he could not resolve. Kylo Ren's alignment with Snoke further illustrates the pattern of replacing one set of expectations with another, rather than achieving autonomy. Snoke's mentorship provided structure but not stability, as it mirrored the conditional approval Ben experienced previously. Snoke frequently criticized Ben's perceived weakness, reinforcing insecurity while providing no supportive mechanism for improvement. This dynamic perpetuated dependency rather than growth. Kylo Ren's inability to reconcile his dual identities appears consistently across his scenes. His confrontations with Rey reveal oscillation between competing frameworks, the rejection of Jedi doctrine, the desire for connection, and the assertion of power defined by the First Order. His proposition to Rey in The Last Jedi reflects an attempt to construct a new identity independent of both past affiliations, but the absence of coherent ideology prevented the formation of a sustainable alternative. Across all canonical sources, Ben Solo's childhood and early adulthood exhibit a clear pattern: high expectations, inconsistent guidance, identity suppression, and manipulation by external actors. His transition to Kylo Ren did not resolve these pressures. It reorganized them into a different form. The evidence indicates that Kylo Ren's sad life was not the product of inherent dysfunction, but the cumulative result of structural conditions that prevented cohesive identity formation.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.